Monday here in the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo. We're going to talk about this Steelers team and the dilemma that faces them as they head to the playoffs, especially with their offense. This team needs to trust Russell Wilson, but can it? And we look at the past few games to answer that question and dive into all the different challenges facing this team as they try to upset the Baltimore Ravens. That and a lot more here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive Podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive Podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injury victims for over 40 years recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have been seriously injured in an accident, call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about this Steelers offensive situation. The defense comes out and delivers. They hold a red-hot Bengals offense that had been scoring prolifically for the past 2 months to just 19 points. And the Steelers offense only gives them 17. They fall short. They get multiple drives in the fourth quarter. I think they had 4 possessions in the fourth quarter. 3 of them they could have won the game on, and they don't take any of those opportunities. I think that we talked about this quite a bit as far as, the running on first down and how that had been a problem. The Steelers started the game running the ball on first down 8 straight times. And that sort of set a rough tone for the team. And then when they started to pass the ball, it was late in the second quarter when it was very predictable that they needed to throw the ball. And I've said this before, but I think that the Steelers are now up against it because of how this guy plays. But I think for this offense to work, because the offensive line has not turned into this unstoppable force that people were hoping it would be, or at least this proficient force that people hoped it would be, you have to lean on your quarterback to be able to make good reads, especially on first down, to take what's there and get the ball to the playmakers to back off defenses. So you have to trust Russell Wilson. But the problem is, when they've trusted Russell Wilson of late, he hasn't delivered, including on that last drive when I thought that he had some not so great judgments on trying to navigate the field and keep the Steelers alive down there. And granted, he didn't get some help. He got a big drop from Pat Freiermuth. But I think the Steelers and a lot of people expected Russell Wilson to be better. And so now the Steelers come to this fork in the road where I think they need to lean on Russell Wilson more or someone to throw the ball more. But at the same time, when they've done it in the past few weeks, he hasn't delivered enough.
Yeah, listen, Chris, this is the reason they went out and they got Russell Wilson. They wanted a veteran quarterback, and they could put the game on his shoulders in situations like these. I mean, I will remind you, I will give you that Russell's game management at the end of that Bengals game was not good. He probably missed a few open receivers during that game as well. But it was only 1 month ago in Cincinnati. Yep. He threw for 414 yards. Yep. He didn't just all of a sudden forget how to play quarterback. So if this is truly what's going on with Mike Tomlin, like he's saying, oh, we can't trust Russell Wilson anymore, then Mike Tomlin is 100% wrong. This is why you went out and got him. Trust him. The formula that you're trying to use now is not working. There are players in that locker room who want more on their shoulders in terms of the passing game. They're not getting it from the coaches right now. So I think we'll probably see some of those players go to Mike, go to Arthur Smith this week, ask for more responsibility. And I think it would be incredibly stupid if they go into this Ravens game trying to win 18-16 like they did at Acrisure Stadium back in the fall. That's not going to work. Lamar Jackson just put up 35 on the Browns without Zay Flowers for a good portion of that game. If you look at what the Ravens have done really since that first Steelers game in Pittsburgh, they've scored 30 points like I think 7 or 8 times, Chris. You're going to have to score points to win this game. Put the ball in Russell Wilson's hands and let him go to work. If it doesn't work, what are we talking about? You're not going to win anyway if you're going to keep doing what you're doing. So, like I said, this is the reason you got him. Just let him go out there and go to work.
I think so too. I think that he is a guy that you got to let out there, kind of let him do what he does. But I also think in that first Ravens game, it wasn't like he only threw the ball 20 times. He threw the ball 36 times, more than Lamar Jackson in that game. And I think that was, they did try to let him do well in that game. I think he had some misses. He had that pass to Darnell Washington in the end zone that if he floats it a little bit lower, it's a touchdown, and they probably win that game going away. But I think that's the thing here, though, is that Russell Wilson, before, when he made mistakes, it was here and there. It was like, okay, he missed this guy, but that's fine, because you know what? He had the Commanders game. He had the Bengals game. The second Browns game, I thought he played very well. And again, I gave him a pass for the Eagles game. He only got the ball twice in the second half. But the second Ravens game, the crucial turnovers he had, the Chiefs game, I didn't think he saw the field well. And even in this game, especially early on, when I thought that there were just times I didn't understand what he was seeing to lead to some of his attacks. I thought he left Pat Freiermuth on the shelf several times, wide open in the middle part of the field. I thought that there were times where he had like one-on-one man coverage across the board, and he would pick Van Jefferson of all people to go to instead of George Pickens or Calvin Austin or Pat Freiermuth. And those are the things that I'm just like, I can't say that they're the worst moves in the world and that Russell Wilson can't do his job, because we're not in the huddle, we're not in their film room, we don't know what their priorities were in those situations. But it just seems to me that like the pacing of those decisions don't add up to success as far as trying to actually move the ball down the field, sustain drives. And I do think Russell Wilson has shown in his career, as he's a veteran, he can flip a switch and play better football. But I think the question that everyone has on their minds, Ray, is after what happened at the end of Ben Roethlisberger's career, are the Steelers witnessing a sort of fall off here from Russell Wilson that's leading to these mistakes, because he hasn't really played well, even when given the football to do so, in a month.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get that sense. Like, I don't get the sense that over a 4-game stretch that Russell Wilson all of a sudden is washed. I will bring this up because Russell addressed it in the post-game news conference. This was talking about George Pickens. He said, well, he has missed 3 weeks. And I think they have had a hard time getting back on the same page. I'll go to that play late in the game where George is in one-on-one coverage and the ball sails 5 yards over his head. George couldn't find it. They're just not on the same page. I mean, they're not. For half the offenses in the NFL, that's pretty much an easy pitch and catch when a guy's in one-on-one coverage in that situation. So as a duo, they're not getting it done right now. And as you know, Chris, there's not a lot behind there. Van Jefferson, Scotty Miller, whoever else you want to do. George had 1 catch for 0 yards. The other receivers in that game, 4 catches for 43 yards. I mean, there's just no one else but George. So they have to work extra hard this week to get Russ and George back on the same page. They have to be a threat against the Ravens. And I'll also say this, because I think it's important to use your best players. Justin Fields was injured too. Put in some packages for Justin Smith.
I agree.
Let the Ravens worry about that. Put some pressure on their defense where they have to account for him as a rusher. I really think the Steelers really missed the boat with their usage of Justin Fields. And I mentioned he's been injured the last week or so, but even going back to when they made this change, they never lined him up as a receiver. They never used him and Russell on the field at the same time. They could have lined him up at running back as a slash type of player with Cordell Stewart, and they never did that. So they're probably not going to do that now, but at the very least, put him in the game at quarterback and put some stress on the Ravens defense.
But like, for example, when they went for it on 4th and 1 late in the first half, I still think that should have been a punt. But if they were going for it there, why not have Justin Fields on in that situation with Jalen Ward? At least force the defense to honor one or the other on that play. You saw they were just all like, hey, it's either a sneak or it's a handoff. Let's just take both. Let's just try to take both of those away. But when we've seen it, they've called it several times this year where Justin Fields has did it. I mean, I forget which game it closed out where it might have been the Bengals game where he closed, but the previous Bengals game where he ran a QB option, got the team going one way and he went the other, and he was able to close out a game. I think it's not good that they haven't gone back to that. Now, granted, again, like you're saying, maybe injuries play a factor in that, but yeah, I agree with you. They haven't used Justin Fields enough, and I also think that it's kind of crazy to think about this, but I feel like we're back to where this offense is still better than where it was last year. They're 16th in the NFL in scoring. They're like people saying, "Oh, this is Matt Canada all over again." I wouldn't say that, but I think the thing that everyone is frustrated about is that this offense is back to not having an identity, because this offense is supposed to be a power run offense, then a play action offense. It hasn't been either of those things for a month now, and you could look at Russell Wilson and, basically like, is this a, throw it up to George Pickens and hope that he makes a play offense? I think it should be more than that. I think it can be more than that, but they've got to show that it can be more than that. And they have to use the different players in this system, because they've shown throughout the year. Mike Williams can make plays. He made a pretty good one against the Bengals. George Pickens can make plays. Pat Freiermuth can make plays. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Calvin Austin. But they got to get back to using them and mixing them up well. And I think that's where the game plan does come into focus there.
Yeah, Chris, I have a hard time believing that Arthur Smith drew up the game plan in Cincinnati, and then a month later he's going to say, "Oh, well, let's go and play a conservative brand of football because it's cold." No, Mike Tomlin made that decision. So what has to happen this week? Art Rooney has to go into Mike Tomlin's office and say, "Get out of the offensive room. Let Arthur do his thing. You worry about the defense. You worry about coaching the rest of the football team. Don't stick your nose in the offensive room where it doesn't belong. Let Arthur Smith drop the game plan and let him do everything on offense."
I don't know. I feel like it's kind of interesting. I'd be interested to see if Mike Tomlin did have a hand in the first Bengals game or didn't have a Bengals. I think he's always kind of in the offensive room as a head coach should be. But I do think there should be a sense that it's like, hey, this whole idea of playing conservative, whether or not it's he's the one saying to do it, that needs to go out, whoever it's coming from. I think that's the idea. I'm not sure if it's Mike Tomlin selling Arthur Smith, "Don't you dare go out there and not call pass plays on first down." I think it's kind of come down to, okay, we've seen what has worked and what hasn't worked, and both have been done by the Steelers this season. So I think if we're going to say Mike Tomlin's responsible for doing it one time, then he has to be responsible for doing it another. So I look at that, and I think that if we're looking at who's responsible for that coming from the coaching staff, it's both of them. They're both responsible for both games.
It's Mike Tomlin's call about what happens that week, and they make that decision early in the week. That's what I'm talking about. Stay out of it. Let the offensive coaches do the offensive things.
I hear you there. I think it's been his call, and I think it's been both of their calls working together throughout the season. Again, I think that's where I'm coming at it from that point. I want to talk defense though, because I do think that this defense did step up in a big way in this game, and I think a lot of that came down to the communication of the game plan to limit the Bengals from what they had been doing very well. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you're injured in an accident, you're probably wondering what's next. Well, for over 40 years, Edgar Snyder Associates helped injury victims answer that very question. Whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with insurance companies, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped over 75,000 people handle the question, what's next? Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk defense here. I do think the Steelers defense did step up in this game. They got 4 sacks on Joe Burrow. They picked him off. They had to defend multiple short fields each time that they held the Bengals to a field goal. And I thought that was a really good sign, especially for a defense that we had said, hey, where's the communication? Why are they having these problems at the start of the season? And yes, they had a coverage bust, I think, on the touchdown and the opening drive of the game, where Corey Trice was clearly looking for help from Cameron Sutton so that he wasn't left one-on-one with Jamar Chase while Joey Porter was covering T. Higgins. But looking at how that game played out, they certainly limited it the rest of the way. They only allowed that single touchdown. I think that goes towards the game planning and what the Steelers had in mind for what the Bengals were trying to do, and being the first team in months to be able to stop that offense.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly better than what they put out there against the Eagles, the Ravens, and the Chiefs. But I keep coming back to the starts, and you can't get behind 10-0 against a good football team when your offense is struggling like that. So that just goes back, Chris, to like the complementary football that was so key for this team in the early half of the season. It's just not there right now. And, Cam Heyward addressed that after the game. The Bengals possessed the ball for 38 minutes in that game.
Mm-hmm.
I think Cam said they didn't have their first 3 and out until the fourth quarter. It was a better performance, Chris, but they're still not the defense that they were back in September or October. Can they recapture that here in the playoffs, especially in their first game against the Ravens? I don't know. I haven't seen that defense for probably 2 months. Maybe there's still something in there, but I will give you that they communicated better. They got 1 turnover, but there's still something missing from that defense. And to me, that's the ability to get those 3 and outs, give the ball back to your offense early, and then see if your offense can get a score and get a lead in that game. I can't remember, Chris, the last time they actually played with a lead. I mean, I think
it's been the Browns game
since that Browns game back in early December.
They haven't had a lead since the Browns game. I think that goes to, part of the problems they're facing. Like you said, complementary football is big there. Now, I will note they did have a 3 and out in middle of the second quarter. And really the second quarter, they showed out. They forced a turnover on downs in the first drive of the second quarter, a 3 and out the next drive, an interception off a short field off the drive after that, and then another short field they had to defend, and they held them to a field goal there. So I think that they did show up. They needed to be better in the first quarter. But you look at the rest of the game, turnover on downs, punt, interception, 3 straight field goals, 2 punts to give the Steelers offense 2 chances to win the game at the end of the game. I thought they did well there. And again, like, this was a passing offense that Jamar Chase, and people brought up T. Higgins. Oh, he missed part of the game. He only missed like the last quarter of the game. He still played 38 passing snaps out of 52 for the Bengals. I thought they had the fair share of him through most of the game, and they handled it well. The big thing, though, I think that I saw something interesting was they sent Patrick Queen on blitzes a lot more in this game than they have for most of the season. But one thing, when I was looking back at his numbers, Ray, is when I saw, and he in this game, he was sent on pass rushes 7 different times. Throughout this season, he has very rarely been asked to do it that much. The time he's done it the most, though, was the first game against the Ravens, when he was sent on 8 blitzes. And it just makes me wonder why that hasn't been a factor in more of the Steelers' defensive game plans throughout the season. I think it was a good part of the game plan this game, not just because it's not like Patrick Queen did get a sack, but it's not saying that, like, hey, when he blitzes, everything's just that much better, but it forces offenses to have to worry about, wait a minute, is he coming, or is that guy coming? When you force offenses to have to play that guessing game as far as where the pressure is coming from, that's the key here. And yes, the times that they've asked him to go on pass rushes are games like this game against the Bengals, the first game against the Bengals, the win against the Ravens at home, the Giants he rushed for 6 times, and the Broncos he rushed for 7. But you got games like the Chiefs where they only sent him 1 time. The last Ravens game on the road, they only sent him 4 times. Against the Eagles, only 3 times. And I think it kind of shows that, hey, maybe being a little too conservative on both sides of the ball, whether it comes to blitzing or passing on first downs, has been the problem.
Yeah, and he's got to get home. He has collapsed the pocket on a few occasions. He's made Burrow step up on a few occasions in that game. But to me, the issue with this defense is unless Cam Heyward is collapsing the pocket from the inside, no one else is going to do it. Keanu Benton's not going to do it on a consistent basis. Larry Ogunjobi surely isn't going to do it. And to me, that's an issue. If you watch that Broncos game yesterday, Chris, their interior defensive line gets after it every single game. They got 60 sacks. Benito's a nice player. He gets some from the outside, but a lot of that is just it's the entire defensive line collapsing the pocket, and it doesn't allow these quarterbacks to step up and to make plays. And the Steelers just don't have that. People are getting on T.J. Watt and Alex Highsmith about their lack of production over the last month. When quarterbacks are getting it out as quickly as they are, and T.J. Watt and Alex Highsmith are getting, especially Watt, when you're getting double teamed and you're getting chipped, it's hard to get home. That's why you need that interior pass rush. And to me, we're going to talk about this a lot after the season ends. That's an issue for the Steelers. They got to get better up front. They need another Cam Heyward type of player on that defensive line, and I think that's really hurting them here as we go down the stretch and into the playoffs.
I mean, if you look at the game, Alex Highsmith had 7 pressures. TJ Watt had 6 pressures. They were clearly impacting Joe Burrow in the pocket. They just weren't getting home. And parts of this, because like you said, it's kind of what the Bengals are trying to scheme them to not take over the game. And in years past, it's been harder to do that. Why? Because they've had better interior defensive line play. Larry Ogunjobi's been better in previous seasons. You think way back to when they had Stephon Tuitt. Him and Cam Heyward were wrecking balls in the middle part of the Steelers defense. So I'm right with you. And I think Keanu Benton, like you said, consistency has been his problem, but I think we've seen flashes from the second-year player. It takes time for guys to develop, especially interior defensive linemen. It took Cam Heyward a few years to find his feet before he became the leader that the Steelers needed. It took Stephon Tuitt, similar amounts of time for him to become a wrecking ball for the Steelers. I think Keanu Benton's on his way. The sack that he had on Joe Burrow in the fourth quarter certainly was huge, and one of, I think, the best moments of the game for the Steelers defense. But to your point, Larry Ogunjobi, Montravius Adams, anybody else on the D-line, where are they to create pressure here? Because that's what this team's supposed to be about. And that's where I think, going back to Patrick Queen and how they're calling it, that's where Teryl Austin, Mike Tomlin, they need to realize, like, hey, the normal send 4 because we're trusting all 4 guys to dominate their gaps. That can't work right now, and the Steelers have to be more aggressive and force quarterbacks into quicker guessing games, and I think they did that for the most part against Joe Burrow.
To show you what they think of their defensive line, they only dressed 4. Dean Lowry and Isaiah Loudermilk were down. They don't think they have any rotation. So basically Cam Heyward and Keanu Benton and Ogunjobi and Adams have to play obviously all the snaps. There's a few instances where they're going to play 3 outside linebackers. And they'll play in their sub packages as well. But in the end, they don't believe in the defensive linemen on the roster, and they're trying to get the most out of what they have. It just hasn't been good enough.
It is not, and they got to get things better, especially with this upcoming matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, a team that beat them by 17 last time. The game was close in the second half until Russell Wilson threw his pick 6, and then the Ravens kind of ran away with it in the end. Can the Steelers channel things to get back into this game and perform better against the Ravens this time around? We'll take our first look at that here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I remind you, this show is also brought to you by Savinas Kane and Gallucci. They're your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas Kane and Gallucci. They're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or go to their website, moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
It's that time of year again to get the Honda of your dreams during Happy Honda Days, where you'll find great offers on a sporty new Civic, spirited Accord, fun to drive HRV, and versatile CRV. So don't wait. Turn your holiday dreams into reality with a new Honda named KBB.com's best value brand. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, this Steelers team is on a 4-game losing streak, and they're facing a team on a 4-game winning streak, the Baltimore Ravens, who have been red hot. As you put it earlier, this Ravens team, like if we're talking about how the Steelers have been playing, this Ravens team has been like the polar opposite. They've scored over 30 points. Steelers haven't scored 20 points in 4 straight games. The Ravens have scored over 30 points in 4 straight games. And granted, level of competition does matter there. The Giants aren't that good. They caught the Steelers during that bad span. The Texans have been a terrible team the past 2 months, and they got the Browns basically setting themselves up for the tank. But still, it's about who. It doesn't. You play who you play. You go out there and you execute. The Steelers, I think, have a tall task to turn things around against this week. It's why you and I said all week they really needed to win this game on Saturday to set themselves up with the Texans, because that would have been at least another team that's struggling, and you could figure it out against them. Now you have to turn it around. Granted, the Steelers have a good history with the Ravens over the past 5 years, but these recent trends, it would take a massive turnaround for the Steelers to be able to pull this win off.
Yeah, and I think talking about beating the Ravens, I think, and you'll hear this from Mike Tomlin and all the defensive players early this week, you have to stop the run. You cannot allow Derrick Henry to get going the way he got going in Baltimore right before Christmas in that game on the 21st. That's the first thing that you have to take care of. Listen, Lamar Jackson very well might beat you with his arm if it gets to that point, but that's the shot that you have to take. If you're the
Agreed.
Steelers, you don't want to be bled to death with Derrick Henry getting 140, 150 yards again. That's not fun, and that's not the way the Steelers ever want to play. Now, Chris, if you can get it to that point, then maybe we could have a conversation. Hey, is Zay Flowers going to play? I think it's going to be questionable early in the week. He apparently has a knee sprain. We'll see where that leads. Then you're talking about, okay, can we cover up Mark Andrews? Can we cover up Isaiah Likely? And then what do you do about Rashad Bateman? To me, Rashad Bateman is the least of your concerns there. You put Joey Porter on him, and then it's how do you defend the tight ends? But you're not going to get to any of that stuff. You won't even be in a position to win that football game if you don't shut down the running game first.
And I think a big thing, we go back to that game, it comes down to the group we were kind of just harping on, the interior defensive line. They got bullied off the ball in that game, and it mucked up the linebackers. They weren't able to be downhill and aggressive because they were getting backed up into. And that's something that can't happen in this game, to your point. I'm right with you. This is a secondary that hasn't been great all year. I'd even struggle to say they've been better than they've been even more than above average at times. I think that they've had really bad weeks. I think they've had some really good weeks, but they've been very up and down as a unit. And granted, injuries play up somewhat of a factor there, but I think this is a game where you got to trust them to be able to say, hey, we're going to need you guys to hang with if Zay Flower plays, if Deontay Johnson plays, if they go back and they bring back Steve Smith to play. It doesn't matter. You guys are going to have to ball and live out there by yourselves. And because this run defense, this front is going to be fully focused on stopping Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson from killing you on the ground. And if they take to the air, they got to trust those guys to make plays in those moments.
Yeah, listen, Lamar Jackson might end up being a 3-time MVP, but if you want to look at this from a psychological perspective, a guy who hasn't performed in the playoffs, don't you want to put the pressure on him in his home stadium, get him off kilter early, maybe let him hear it from the crowd if it's a close game? I mean, to me, that's the way you want to go into it. And the only way you could do that is if you shut down the run. That's going to be a fascinating little sidebar to this week is, the Ravens failures in the playoffs, with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. That storyline is not going to go away until they get to the Super Bowl. They set themselves up nice again. They did a great job of coming back and overtaking the Steelers, so they'll have at least one home playoff game. But to me, there's still going to be pressure there. I think the fans are going to be antsy if that's a close game early. So the Steelers have to do everything they can in their power to make sure that does happen. So he does feel a little bit of pressure in this game.
Agreed. Getting him off his rhythm, not allowing them to the Ravens to play the way they want. And again, it comes down to stuffing the run and not giving him those easy escape lanes. And again, that's been their recipe for years against the Ravens. It's no secret. And I think that's again what's encouraging about the Steelers defense. Maybe being able to continue their progress from what they did well in the Bengals game. You and I said it for weeks. This wasn't about the Steelers defense doing something completely outside of themselves and discovering new elements of their game. They just needed to get back to their fundamentals, to communicating, to taking over certain gaps, to making sure that they're playing well. If they could do those things, which we've seen them do for most of this season, they can beat teams, and they should have beaten the Bengals based off of the way the defense played. I think the last game against the Ravens, they did enough to hang in there. Minka Fitzpatrick's interception kind of kept the game alive until the turnovers really killed them. But this needs to be a game where turnovers, can't be the thing that kill you on offense. But if they do happen, you got to defend short fields. Mike Tomlin's talked about it, how when they turned the ball over against the Ravens the last time, and I think against the Chiefs as well, they didn't defend their short fields against the Bengals. And I was mistaken; it wasn't 2 field goals; it was an interception and a field goal in those situations. If those situations happen in this game, you got to rise up and be the defense that you're supposed to be. That's supposed to be the group that pulls this unit to victory. And I think it might have to be that kind of a situation.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about the great quarterbacks in the NFL right now, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, all those guys in the AFC, Lamar Jackson is the only one of those guys, and maybe Josh Allen to a certain extent later in playoffs, but he's balled out in some of those losses. Lamar Jackson is the only one of those guys who has actually looked bad in some of these playoff games. So the Steelers have to figure out what that was in the past. Look at what the Chiefs have done against him. Look at what these other teams have done against them. The Steelers have had a good formula as well, right?
I was gonna say, look at what they've done against them.
Yeah, yeah, so they got to figure out a way to make that happen. And I think the best way to do that is try to get in his head a little bit. Like I said, I think this Flowers injury is big. He's their number one receiver. The Steelers are going to have a puncher's chance if they come out and play well early. And I know Mike Tomlin always says, our starts don't define us. That's how you finish. Well, your starts have been awful. At least give yourself a chance in this football game by playing well early. And if they could do that and they can put pressure on a team that's going to be, feeling their sphincters clamp up a little bit in front of the home crowd, then maybe you might have a shot.
I'm sorry.
That's what it is in the playoffs, Chris. That's the way.
Sorry, the fist. He just had me dying there. But I did. Ray, this caught me off guard when someone said this going into the last week. They announced the Pro Bowl teams. When Zay Flowers made the Pro Bowl, they said he is the first ever Ravens wide receiver to make a Pro Bowl. I was like, nah, that ain't real. And I was like, oh, wow, he really is. I never realized that. That's crazy. And to your point, if he's not in the game, he had 100+ yards on in the last game when Joey Porter Jr. was missing. That's an opportunity to limit what the Ravens do through the air and say, hey, D-line, linebackers, crush that run game. Secondary, we're trusting you to not lose to Rashad Bateman.
Yeah. Just put the pressure on him. Let him start feeling it like in the second quarter, third quarter, if it's a close game. And I'll be a little bit intrigued by that. I still don't feel great about the way the Steelers offense is playing, but if the defense can at least do what they usually do against Lamar, and Lamar can play the way he has in the postseason, which is to say not very good in a lot of these games, then Saturday night might be a little bit interesting for the Amazon Prime viewers.
Keep it here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We've got you coverage all week long, not just this show, the North Shore Drive podcast, which airs Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube, but also all of our daily content from all of our sports writers. It's a Pittsburgh playoff week. We're going to be breaking this game down every step of the week. There is a Monday Mike Tomlin press conference today, so be on that. I will not be there covering that. I will be headed to Durham, North Carolina with my partner, Stephen Thompson. We're getting ready to cover Pitt at Duke, a big ACC basketball matchup, but I'll be back in time to do more shows throughout the week as we get ready to cover Steelers Ravens at the end of the week, Saturday night, 8 p.m. for a big AFC North showdown. Keep it here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.